what do we call this now? The Traverse Area Community Media Studio. And I've got the cameraman hermetically sealed in the glass box, so I can take my mask off now. And the fogging on my glasses is going away, so we're good to go. This is Jax Tea Party, and it's probably the longest series they've had here in the Community Media Center. And I recently came back from China last year. Actually, it's hard to believe that, you know, I got as much education and connections that I have, and I ended up homeless in a pandemic in Traverse City last October, and it was quite an eye-opener. Like I say, right now I'm a certified general appraiser, and I got an MBA, and I've got a fair amount of experience in different kinds of jobs. So how you end up homeless in that situation is a really long story. But I was kicked out of China in October of 2020, and even though for the last 10 years I've gone back and forth between China every year, living in Traverse City in the summers, I ended up without a place to live because nobody wanted somebody from China to live with them because of the virus. So it really created an awkward situation. And when I had basically 3 days to make arrangements, and I had an office here in Traverse City that a friend let me use, and I literally lived in an office for 2-3 months before I got the place I'm in now. So how did this all come about? It's, like I say, it's a long story, and I was been in Traverse City since '78, and now I was an assessor and then township supervisor in East Bay Township. I got into some appraising and some technology work, did a little bit of programming, things like that. And in the year 2000, I went on an educational mission, kind of an adventure, but also a charity where Oakland University, my university, had a relationship with the Guizhou province in China. It's a southerly province in the mountains of China, very, very remote. And they sent a group to the U.S. I think it was probably 1986, 87. They needed English teachers, but they didn't have any money. So the whole Education Commission came to the United States to look for teachers, and they wound up at Oakland University during the Easter break, and were looking for teachers to come to China, and they were willing to pay for the food and lodging and all that stuff. And make a long story short, the people from Oakland University, the teachers, organized themselves and created something called the what was the name of it? Oakland University Summer Institute, where they sent teachers for 4 months, 4 weeks, every summer to train English teachers. And they when I got involved in it in 2000, they had, anywhere from 6 to 12 volunteers going into Guizhou province and training English teachers. They were all middle school English teachers, and I taught English, and I just loved it. And then I ended up going back there in 2003 just to visit, and I got offered a job and the real estate appraisal was up and down. So I ended up staying there for 3 years. And anyway, that's how I got a relationship with China. And I went back and forth to the U.S. every year. And eventually the appraisal business was being handled by other appraisers that were friends. And it just didn't get any better. I came back to the U.S. to try to save the business, but by 2008, there was no business in the real estate industry for appraisers. So ultimately, I ended up going back to China and teaching English. So that's the short story. But in the second time around, it was 2010, I think I got there. Almost got married. But I decided this is such a unique experience that I should do a blog. So that's what I ultimately did. I created this blog, and I knew how to make websites and stuff, so I created a website called tourguizhou.com. And here I've got it on the computer here, and this picture is a picture of a kind of a fortress. It used to be a pavilion in the middle of the river, and it shows it's a landmark in Guiyang. But if you look at this page, you scroll down, you can see over here on the right, you've got different subjects. And as you look at it, look at the archives, I've been taking notes about China and the U.S. For a long time. And this information is still up there. I thought maybe I was going to write a book or do something with it. I never got around to it. But anyway, it goes back to October of 2012. That's when I started taking notes. That's when I started this blog. And there's a lot of information in there. So I've kept notes on China and what's been going on. It got really quite interesting. Let me say, this was maybe 2020. Let's look at January 2020. That's kind of when we had a little trouble with the pandemic here. So this is a real-time diary, basically, of what was going on in China from the point of view of an expat that was teaching English. So, give you a little example. There's been significant social media on this coronavirus problem here in China. I've heard that there is a survival rate of about 98%, with deaths occurring in vulnerable subpopulations like old people, young people, and pre-existing conditions. I was here in China 17 years ago when SARS hit. So, ironically enough, I went to China in 2003 to teach English, in the spring of 2003. And ironically, that's when the SARS epidemic hit. And I was over there with another lady that had volunteered with Oakland University, and she was there at the same school with me. And I watched their response. The first thing that they did was they've organized work groups to try to clean up the city. And of course, they got everybody together in groups to clean the city. And obviously, if anybody was infected, that was a good contagious kind of event. So there was a lot of learning from scratch. And they ultimately kind of locked us up in the school. We used to be able to move around the city in February and March, but by April, we were pretty well locked down. And the lady that was there with me was younger, and she didn't want to be locked down, so she took a bus to another city during that outbreak, and ultimately they wouldn't let her teach the students because she might be contagious, and they made her kind of stay away from other people. It was a pretty rough time for her. But anyway, that was my first experience with pandemics, and ultimately, I think about June, I went back to the U.S. and I was curious whether I was going to be able to come back. They wanted me to come back the following September, and the virus had cleared up by September. And as luck would have it, Guizhou province was in the mountains, and they didn't have any virus. It was actually the only province, with the exception of Tibet, that did not have any kind of SARS activity. So it was pretty lucky. So anyway, that was my first introduction to pandemic, was the first SARS. And I stayed there for another 3 years, of course, always coming back to the U.S. in the summertime. And anyway, this is the website. Most recently, I think probably September of 2021, I was really petering out with my website activities. I had to sell all my stuff. The two presidents, Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, were not getting along very well after the beginning of the pandemic in January, February of 2000. Now, I knew right away that this was a serious situation, and let me tell you why. Back in 2020, we had, I gave an update of where the viruses were, and they called it pneumonia back then. And so there were notes taken about the advent of this SARS activity. By the way, if there's anything you were interested in about China, you can do a search engine. And this is just a search engine for my website. So in the time I was in China, I had some trouble with rats. So I did a 5-part series on rats. And it gave you what it was like to live in places that really didn't have rats under control. So I just did whatever I felt like doing, and I took care not to criticize the Chinese government, because I was a guest in that country. I didn't feel it was my role. And this website is called tourguizhou.com. That's tourguizhou.com. And it's never been blocked in China. Most of the .coms are blocked, but this was kind of complimentary to the Chinese, and I made a point not to really criticize them. Different kinds of subjects. You can criticize or not, and I prefer to stay positive. There was a, hang on, let's look at the search engine. There might be one called The Real China. No, I don't have it. Well, there's a lot of stories about China and what's it like to live in China, different kinds of people in China. So anyway, that's the history of China. That's an introduction to the website, and really it documents that I've had some history with China and the pandemics, and especially, well, I thought I knew something, and the end of March, it was clear to me that this pandemic was headed to the U.S., and the U.S. had screwed up the testing. We didn't know where the virus was, and it didn't appear as if we really knew what was going on. At the beginning, the U.S. was saying there's nothing really to worry about for the U.S. at this time, and I knew that was wrong. I knew that was wrong because you recall I said that in the first SARS epidemic, Guizhou province didn't receive any infections. But at the end of January, they were saying that this was not humanly transmitted, that people that got sick over in Wuhan were not infected by other humans, that it was bats and snakes and things like that. But as soon as I heard about this in maybe January 22nd, 23rd, they started saying that the bats and snakes were responsible for it. And that's a long ways for a bat or a snake to travel from Wuhan to Guizhou. And we had something like 30 or 40 cases of this illness at the end of January. And I thought, this is a really fast and really serious situation. And on a Chinese TV, they had grave sites being dug, row after row after row of people who had died and were being buried in Wuhan. So I thought, well, this is really serious. And then the U.S. response was tepid at best. They were afraid that the stock market might go down if there was any hint of a pandemic. So it was kind of hushed up, and our president was saying, you know, don't worry, this is just going to go away. We'll be squared away by Easter. And I found out later that, you know, he was just trying to avoid a panic. And of course, it was his call how to respond. Do you shut the whole economy down? Do you shut the world economy down? Or you just try to power through what could be just a temporary illness? And I think the president took the second choice, which was, in retrospect, probably the wrong choice. But anyway, by March, I had decided that there's going to be face masks needed in the U.S. because as of beginning of February, I couldn't find a face mask in China. Everybody was told to wear face masks. And that's how I thought you're supposed to fight the virus. And they shut down the cities and basically prevented people from traveling around. Kept you in your apartment. You were allowed to go out of your apartment once every other day. One person from your family could go grocery shopping every other day. And then they had cell phones that tracked you. So if you got on a bus and it turned out you were sick, Chinese government would know all the people that had been on that bus just from their tracking through the cell phones. There was one thing, let me check the time here. One thing was very interesting about culture. Culture is just about everything. And the Chinese culture is, you know, probably 5,000 years old. And our culture is about the same if you go back to the Bible and the time that we've been keeping track of things. We go back 5,000 years too. But our culture went in the direction of freedom, whereas Chinese culture was more in the direction of a unified government response was always more important than individual rights. So they have a basically different kind of culture. And it's a lot of face saving and making sure that You don't criticize other people and make them lose face. What I'm getting at, when you're living in a different culture, you gradually absorb some of the things. And on March 30th, I wrote a letter to the county county administrator in Traverse City. And I'm just going to tell you how far out I got, because I was very supportive of the Chinese government and their efforts to shut down a country and fight the virus. I'm going to read to you a little bit from my letter. I'm at your service to help formulate your response to this health crisis. This is perhaps the biggest health and safety event since the 1919 Spanish flu. I've spent a lot of time in China over the last 20 years and happened to be quarantined in 2003 and again this year. The institutional memory was quite good, and China learned a lot in 20 years. I had a chance to study this response, and I'm happy to share that information with you. The nature of this pandemic is both fast and deadly. What we do in the next 2 or 3 weeks in Grand Traverse County will determine whether Munson overflows with emergency patients or not. Let me describe quickly how China, particularly Guiyang, responded to this outbreak. As far as we know, this was a successful intervention, and restaurants are now open. Streets are busy, and people are going back to work. The success of the intervention was evident about March 15th, roughly 6 to 7 weeks of a total and focused lockdown. So that's what I thought the U.S. not only should do, but that's what I assumed that we were going to do, that we were going to recognize the deadly nature of this threat, lock down the country for, 5 or 6 weeks, and that would get rid of the viruses. Basically, anybody that got sick was either going to die or develop immunity in the usually about 14 days, but 4 to 6 weeks, and it would be behind you. There was an economist named Paul Romer that advocated this, and he kept repeating that over and over again into the summer, that we just have to shut down for 6 weeks and we'll have it behind us. But instead, what we did resulted in a lot of people getting sick, and then it allowed that virus to mutate too. So not only did we not develop the herd immunity right away, but we created a whole, what you call petri dishes, where you grow viruses and bacteria. All of the American public turned into petri dishes where this virus was being bred. And even though the Chinese were initially responsible for the spread of the virus, I think our population also allowed this virus to spread too. Anyway, that was my impression of the virus, and I've told you about the website. Also, what I was doing in China was really trying to represent American people there and let people know what was happening. And when people ask me, are you a spy? What are you doing here? I say, no, I'm teaching English, and I also go around and take care of stuff for the government. And they say, well, what government? So, well, the government, Chinese government, U.S. government, we all need to be getting along. We all need to be understanding each other. So that's what I figured my role was, to help educate the Chinese about what's going on in the U.S. and why we're doing what we do. And as time went on, people are going, why don't you fight that virus? Why are you just organizing groups and fighting the government with the face masks and things like that? And I just told them, listen, American people think that they're free. and they're not gonna follow orders from the government unless they have a very good reason to. And we believe in volunteerism. And when it comes down to it, if you're going to have to live your life taking orders from the government or die, I think there's a lot of Americans that would rather die than just live their lives as slaves to the government. So that was kind of a message, and anybody who thinks that they can just come in and give orders to people and expect Americans to obey, they're going to be disappointed. And I was able to explain that to the Chinese people here. I had some interesting confrontations where Chinese people, a lot of them like to drink. And I got to know a lot of members of the Communist Party, and sometimes we'd be drinking the local distilled spirits. It's called Baijiu or Mao Tai, and people would get pretty drunk and get pretty rowdy. And there was a guy at the table I was at where he says, you know, U.S. is trying to bully China around. We're gonna have to have a war. I think we gotta have a war between U.S. and China. And people were very trying to shut this guy up. And I said, no, let him talk. I mean, we need to talk about this stuff. I said, you know, there's a lot of people in the U.S. that agree with you. There's a lot of people that think there should be a war because every year China gets bigger and bigger, and you're growing faster than we are. You've got 4 times the population. And there's a number of people in the U.S. that think we're going to have to fight you anyway. And they would prefer the sooner the better. Because the bigger you get, the stronger you get, the more difficult that war is going to be. So you go around saying you think there should be a war. Well, there's people on both sides of the ocean that believe that. I don't believe that. I think we can cooperate. I think we can learn to live together and be better for it. But I don't think that a war would do anybody any good. It's the first time in our history that a war can actually destroy the human race. So this old-time thinking of let's go to war to try to straighten things out, I think that's obsolete. Anyway, that's a message I had for the Chinese whenever the subject of friction came up, and that's also the same message I have for people in the U.S. We've got to learn how to work out our differences. I've just been reading about what's happening in China, and it used to be they were very polite online and very polite people. They would talk about anything you wanted to talk about, except what we call the 4 Ts: Tiananmen, Taiwan, Tibet, and what was the other one? There was 4 Ts anyway. You weren't supposed to talk about certain sensitive issues, but other than that, you could talk about politics or whatever you wanted. Now it seems that the internet is getting very insulting, and it reminds me of the internet here in the U.S., where people are insulting each other routinely. So even though freedom of speech was quite free online in China, except for the 4 Ts, now they're fighting with each other quite a bit. I was just reading that some teacher made a mistake of saying he admired the work ethic of the Japanese, and his students turned him into the government, and that teacher got demoted, and now he works in a library. So that freedom to discuss issues without getting into a big hassle, that's disappearing in China as well. And that's the one thing I noticed back in the U.S. You couldn't say anything about politics without getting in an argument with somebody. And that's kind of new for me because It used to be freedom of speech was very valued, and you would say, I disagree with you, but you're entitled to your opinion. And now I'm not sure that's true in the U.S. anymore. I think if you disagree with other people, you're going to have somebody in your face. So anyway, I'm hoping that this Jax Tea Party video can raise some of these issues, and we can talk about what's going on in the world, and hopefully we'll keep this thing going on.